Sounds good.
Cool. 3, 2, 1, go. Hello there, people and listeners of the Hungry Podcast. Today I'm beyond excited to welcome Ellie Webb onto the podcast. Ellie is founder of Caleno, who make these absolutely delicious alcohol-free cocktails or spirits, I should say. They've won listings at Sainsbury's, Amazon, GoPuff, Waitrose, M&S. It's just such an insane product, Ellie. As I said to you just before we hit the record button, I was having one in the Althorpe in Wandsworth Common over the weekend, and they are just, it's so delicious, and it's kind of perfect timing with Stoptober. So look, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Dan. Happy to be here and happy to be sharing Caleno with more people.
Well, as I was saying, I think just to give a bit of context for listeners, like the day we're recording this, I'm now, I think like 22 days into going sober for a little bit. Like I love a booze up and I love a drink, so I'm not going to go completely teetotal, but I was hitting it very hard in Lisbon and just drinking loads. To be honest, it was like sort of five days a week, and it wasn't like going out and binging till late. It was like 3 or 4 drinks, but then it's like every night. And now I've kind of stopped, and I've got this kind of, I don't know, like lucid, polished clarity and kind of calmness with everything I'm doing. So it's perfect. And your product was genuinely tremendously helpful with that on the weekend when all my mates were kind of smashing the shots and the pints. So thank you so much.
You get involved, but do you have that like smug feeling the next day when everyone's suffering with a major hangover and you're just there like, I feel great, I'm going for a run?
Yeah, no, I did. No, so it was kind of like I knew I had these 2 sticking points in my head. So the first one was last week we hosted a supper club with I don't know if you know the Copy Club, with those guys, and I was like, right, this is going to be a sticking point because I'm used to having like at least a glass of vino. Was on the Lucky Saints. I was like, okay, right, banging. Drove home. I was like, this is brilliant. And then I was like, right, the next hurdle is my mates because they love a booze up. I did kind of feel sanctimonious when I did get up the next day and went on a run. You do feel like you've got this extra energy, but it's it can, I don't know, it's hard. But now I've taken that first step. I think you build momentum. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you do every day, and like I think. Also, it's those big moments like you talk about, work or going to a work event where you'd normally have a drink, or meeting your friends who, might be boozing and you're not. Or a lot of people find like going to a wedding and they're not drinking. Like that's every time you get past like certain hurdles where you normally reach for a drink of alcohol. Every time you kind of get past that, you think, oh, actually, this isn't as hard as I thought. I can do this, and gives you that extra momentum.
Oh, absolutely. So where I want to start this kind of story, I suppose, is read on your LinkedIn, and it said, this trip to Colombia changed my life and career path forever. It was a post you'd done. I kind of want to add some color and context to that. What were you doing kind of 6 months pre that trip to Colombia is kind of first question. And then to add to that is, what was your relationship with booze like then?
Yeah, so I had actually quite a similar experience to you, Dan. So back in 2016, I was working for a alcohol company. Basically, they were a wholesaler, so they sold all manner of booze, wine, spirits, beer, cider, pretty much everything, to pubs, bars and restaurants all around the UK. So my job was to put on events for them, invite people to come around and basically try all the drinks. So I'd be creating things like vodka domes, gin gardens, rum shacks. Like it was all alcohol. And so you can imagine like these events, like it's very much encouraged to get involved afterwards and booze and drink. And I think working for an alcohol company, you are very much immersed in it. So it just means as well, kind of the festive period in Christmas time, which is traditionally a time where you drink quite a lot. If you work for an alcohol company, that's kind of multiplied, because as well as the social events that you've got going on with friends, you've also got work stuff, which involves alcohol. So I kind of came into the new year, 2017, feeling like I wanted to take a bit of a break from alcohol. And It just happened to be January, where a lot of people take part in dry January. So I decided to do the challenge, and I think I was 26, 27 at the time. So the first time in my adult life, I'm ashamed to say, where I'd tried to take a month off alcohol. And like you know, if I'd go out with friends, normally they'd be drinking. So it was tough, you know, it was tough. But I didn't want to be that person who didn't go out and didn't take part in stuff. So I still wanted to socialize. I still wanted to go and see my friends. So I can remember being out in Bristol one night, and we'd gone to see a live band, and it was a really fun night. Everyone was enjoying themselves. Friends were going up to the bar, ordering gin and tonics, like craft beer. And I got there and I was like, oh no, what do I order? And I looked around and there weren't many options. You know, we're talking 6 years ago now. So I think I ended up ordering a Diet Coke, which I didn't really want to have. And then I had another one and I thought, I'm not going to drink Diet Cokes all night. So I just switched to water. And that was the situation at the time. Those were the options. It was, if it wasn't Diet Coke, it was like J2Os. If you asked a barman or a barwoman, what have you got that's non-alcoholic, they would point you at the soft drinks, which the kids were drinking. And I was like, oh, I really want what my friends are drinking, but I just don't want the alcohol. And if I was honest with myself, there were loads of times where I would have been perfectly happy going to a work event or a social where I would be drinking something. I'd be happy to drink something that felt like alcohol, tasted like alcohol, but didn't have alcohol in it. I wasn't looking for that buzz. I wasn't looking to get drunk. I was just looking to be part of a social situation, and the alcohol was just like the extra part. So yeah, it kind of got me thinking about this and thinking, well, if I'm in this situation and there's millions of other people taking part in dry January that they want to take a bit of a break, and it's not just January, it's other parts of the year where actually I thought there are times where I don't want to drink, but I'm having to drink alcohol because I don't really want to drink soft drinks and some of those other options. So it kind of felt like a bizarre situation where I'm forced into drinking alcohol, which is crazy, really, if you think about it. So that was, sort of 6 months before. So that was in January. And then kind of get thinking about this idea and like, does anything exist? And looking at the market. Obviously, I worked in the drinks industry, so I kind of looked around, but it wasn't really something that my company were talking about. Even if you said you were doing dry Jan, it was a bit of a taboo. It's like, oh, alcohol good, non-alcoholic.
Yeah.
We want people to keep drinking, kind of thing. So I started this kind of period of exploration and a bit of research. And it was then around 5-6 months later that I decided to go out to Colombia, where I've got family. And it was a trip that I'd had planned for a while. And I guess I kind of went on this trip thinking, I've been doing some work up to that point, mostly research, mostly kind of looking at how the hell, if I want to make a non-alcoholic spirit at some point, because I wanted to do a spirit. That's what I drank mostly. I drank mostly gin, rums, like mostly spirits. So I knew I wanted to try and figure out a way. And I kind of went on this trip going, I'm either going to come back and just think, okay, career change, like find a new job, like do that. Or I'm going to come back and think, no, actually, I want to do this. And thankfully it was the latter. But that trip to Colombia just provided so much inspiration for me. I travelled around, I don't know if you've ever been to South America before, but I travelled around the country, landed in Bogota, which is the capital, and then went over to Medellin, which is like really famous for street art, the coffee region, which had some amazing, colourful towns and cities, up to the coast as well. And everywhere I went, people were really warm and friendly. I think despite what people think about South America, and particularly Colombia, actually Colombians are quite often voted the happiest like nation in the world. They don't have loads, but they're really happy, open, friendly people, and they love to dance. They've just got this like love for life. And I just really soaked that in. And I think growing up, I kind of experienced that with my family, and, you know, parties and family get-togethers, there'd always be music, there'd always be dancing. So I kind of just wanted to bring that attitude into the brand. Like, no, this doesn't have to be boring. It's more that the options are just pretty crap at the moment. And actually, I think we need some better options. We need to make it more exciting for people. We need brands that are going to want to make people try this category. And then I think the other thing that really inspired me traveling around was the fruits, were the tropical fruits and some of the markets I went to. I mean, Colombia has an abundance of tropical fruit. I mean, they're the second most biodiverse country in the world. And I remember growing up, my grandma always making me different juice smoothies with all these different like obscure fruits that you just can't find in the UK. And I just got fascinated with all the different flavors and thinking, okay, well, if I'm making a spirit and I'm using a lot of the kind of more recognized botanicals, can I start introducing some unusual ones, so some exotic fruits as well, just to keep things interesting and bring in some bold flavors. So it was really, yeah, when I talk about that kind of trip changing my life, I came back and I was like really excited about this idea. It would almost gone from an idea through to a concept, and I was starting to kind of form it in my mind, and it was really after that Caleno and the brand really got going.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in that. I think the first thing is, just for listeners, Ellie kindly sent me this box, which is hands down the best kind of buyer box, branded box that I've ever received. It just hits every kind of sensory element, you know, the tactile feel of the box and the bottle, all the kind of wild, lurid colours. You know, it's kind of like, it feels like this Colombian carnival that's just smacking you in the face when you open it, and the product's fucking unreal as well, so it kind of ticks every box. And it does feel like you have kind of put all of those things that you've just said about the dancing, the happiness, and just the vibe of Colombia, you've kind of put into a bottle. And it's really interesting because, as you said at the beginning, there's still this taboo with booze that we need to break, which is that, you know, if you're not boozing, you're a bit of a goon, and you're not having fun. We associate fun with booze. Yeah. And actually what I'm learning from you and from kind of doing this kind of experiment myself is that you don't need to booze to have fun. Yeah. And there's this, I don't know where I read it. There's this brilliant quote, which I was basically saying to myself when I was trying to get myself psyched up to do this little period of like Stoptober, and it was like, alcohol is the only drug that if you stop taking, people think you've got a problem. Guy called Chris Williamson, I think it is. And I was like, that's so true. You know, if people are like taking any other drug, they're just like, oh, there's something wrong with you. But with booze, no, that's fine. And it breaks back that kind of taboo. And I think you guys are doing a salient job of breaking that down. Where I want to go back to is, you said you kind of had a busy Christmas leading up to that January. How come was your mental health in a like low state? Like, what was the actual why? Did you just not feel great about yourself? Like, why did you want to stop specifically?
I think for me it was more career focused.
Right.
Ironically, I think because then I ended up leaving my job and then starting this and starting from scratch. But I think coming into like my late 20s and, you know, being hungover, you're just not productive the next day. You know, as hard as you think you might be able to work, you just can't. Well, I can't. If I've got a bad hangover, I just want to crawl back into bed and I can't concentrate properly. And I think if you want to get on in your career, then you need to be present and you need to be on it, and, you know, you need to be responsive. And so January, I think that year, you know, quite often when you get to an end of a year, you reflect and you look forward and you think, okay, what do I want next year to look like? You might set some resolutions. And I think for me, I was really focused on my career at that point. I wanted to marketeer by background, and I think I wanted to set myself a challenge of growing a brand. And at that point, I kind of had in my head maybe like brand manager position. That's sort of the the route I was heading in. But then, doing dry January and then being in this situation, I thought, well, actually, there's an opportunity here, and no one's really doing anything about it. And this is an opportunity for me to create a brand and start it from scratch. And it's, for a marketeer, it's the ideal problem to have, of kind of like, this basically fell into my lap, and I just thought, it seems so obvious to me that why is there really nothing being done about it? So I would say it was driven by that. I think it was driven by kind of career ambitions primarily.
That's so interesting, because then you actually sidestep into your own thing anyway. So it's kind of, I do. It's weird, because I think you kind of, what I'm learning is you almost have this calmness and clarity. Like when snow falls in the morning and it's like super calm, my brain feels a bit like that. And so it allows me to make kind of less rushed, frantic decisions, which when I'm hungover, I do all the time. And it's interesting how you almost gave the pause to then go into Caleno. One thing you said on your LinkedIn, and I think this will be brilliant for our listeners who may either be at that kind of, which road do I take for my career, or I want to start a thing, I don't know where to start. And you said, never be put off by the enormity of an idea or the potential road ahead. It all starts with one step, or in my case, a sketch. And listeners should look on LinkedIn for that, because it's a brilliant little sketch of the bottles in the early days. Yeah. From there on in, it's just small steps which consistently work towards a bigger goal. Now, I always believe that the first step will then compound and compound, but it's just taking those first 3 steps. Yeah. So what were the steps you took from literally drawing that Caleno bottle to making the actual product in your kitchen, and then actually putting it in one of these bottles? Like, what were those first kind of 6 months like for you?
Yeah, I think so as I said before, like when you think about an idea and where it could go, sometimes it can seem like a massive mountain, and very often that, and the enormity of that idea can put people off. But if you take it kind of one step at a time, like you said, then gradually you reach those smaller goals, and they eventually end up leading up to the bigger goal. So I started first with research. So actually, I think it's important for people who do have an idea, not to jump straight into it and just think that it's the best idea ever. Do your research, do your due diligence. What is out there at the moment? Is this even something that people want? And that's kind of what I spent a lot of time doing in the beginning. So I remember, I probably should have done this, but I managed to extract all my Facebook contacts and send them all a questionnaire. Basically, I wanted to find out about people's drinking habits and understand how they drank, how often they drank, in terms of non-alcoholic cocktails, what flavors appealed to them. I can't even remember what was in it. It was that long ago, but it was there was a desire to kind of understand. Is it just me? So understand the kind of the consumer a bit more. I did a lot of research on the internet around the non-alcoholic market, what players were there, what brands were there, kind of creating non-alcoholic versions of products. So started there. Then the next stage was actually developing a liquid. And although I knew a little bit about, so I'd done my WSET, which is wine and spirits training. So I'd done my level 2 in spirits. So I understood a little bit about the different production processes that you could use to make different spirits. So I took some knowledge about the types of ingredients that you would use there, but still creating a non-alcoholic spirit is very different, because alcohol carries most of the flavour, as does the sugar, which is also present within an alcoholic spirit. So I had to find a way to create that without using alcohol, and actually we don't use sugar either. So that took a while.
How did you actually do that? Sorry for interrupting, but without giving away the secret recipe.
LinkedIn was a great friend to me, actually. LinkedIn was not a platform that I used an awful lot. I had a profile, but it was great at finding people, just almost cold calling or cold emailing. It was great at reaching out to people. Obviously people put their job titles on their LinkedIn. So anyone that had beverage specialist or development, or anyone basically that knew more about this than me, I reached out to. And And it was the same when I was looking for, later down the line, when I was looking for bottlers, and some people, just didn't reply. And then occasionally someone would, and if they didn't have a solution or could help me themselves, they'd put me in touch with someone. So it was through recommendations, and that didn't cost me anything. It was just reaching out to people. I literally had no idea. All I had was this knowledge. I kind of knew the flavour profiles I wanted. I knew the sort of ingredients that I wanted. I've been doing a lot of research, following my trip from Colombia on the different kinds of ingredients. I'd actually been experimenting in my kitchen as well. So I ordered a load of different botanical ingredients, started extracting them with in my kitchen, like basically heating them up, seeing how easily the flavour extracted. But the reason I started contacting people was I could be here for months and months. Like, this is going to take ages.
Yeah.
To teach yourself some of the specialist knowledge that often you need in either beverage or food creation. It's not always worth, entrepreneurs can teach themselves a lot of things, and they do, but sometimes you have to hold your hands up and go, actually, this is too much for me to learn. I could be here for years, and actually find the right people. So I think it's important to recognise when you have to find the specialists and seek them out. But the internet was my friend in terms of research and figuring out who I'd need. And then when I found someone to help me to kind of work alongside, it was a case of getting into the development and trying different flavours, different methods, seeing what worked. It was a massive process of exploration. Some things worked, some things didn't. It was a lot of trial and error. That process took about a year and a half. It was about a year and a half before I actually finalised the liquid. Then I had
how many iterations did you go through on say the dark and spicy?
Well, the dark and spicy came later. So I developed
Right.
light and zesty first. It had a slightly different name then. So light and zesty was the original. Probably about, I'd say 50. As many as 50 maybe. To be honest, I lost count.
No, it's so interesting because the more guests I've interviewed on this podcast, the ones that are doing super well are the ones who spend ages at the beginning being maniacal and militant about the product. Because I see so many brands who want to put the sexy bells and whistles on the packaging, but if you haven't focused on the product, you may get picked up once off a supermarket shelf, but you're not going to get that repeat. And it's just really interesting to see. And the product is unreal. Like, it's so unreal. It's just delicious, and it's just interesting to see that. And I also think, go on.
On that point about, I think what you've said is really true in terms of getting it right. And no one was more surprised than me, because I've been called slapdash. I've been called I get things done quickly. But when it came to the product, I was like, maybe it was because I'd worked in the drinks industry and I wanted to preserve that reputation. But I was like, I'm not putting a product out there unless, I would drink it and I'm really happy with the quality. So as I was iterating, different recipes were coming through, I would literally go out and spend a day in either Bristol or London, and I would just go in and pop into bars, restaurants, cafes even, and get feedback from the bartenders. I'm like, these are guys that are serving drinks every day. It was a totally new concept for them, so I wanted to understand what they thought about the concept, but also get their feedback on the liquid. Where could it be improved? And I think I ended up visiting around 150 places in total. So I'd just take days off work and go out and do that. And that gave me a lot of feedback to then go away and improve the liquid. But like you say, it's really important to get it right. Like, don't put anything out that's substandard. Of course, you can get real-time feedback from consumers and improve it, but at least make sure that first version is something that you're super happy with.
It's so interesting because, you've obviously got this ability to just kind of hustle and put yourself out there and just, reach out to people. And it's kind of interesting because it's almost the antithesis of what school tells us to do, which is almost they force feed us this information, you regurgitate it. And when it comes to being a founder, you've almost got to kind of completely can that off, and then, have this ability just to go and grab information and people. You talked about your family at the beginning, and you're always having these parties and pulling people together. It's quite interesting that, how do you think your kind of family shaped, where did that ability to kind of, hustle come from? Maybe your family, how did that come around?
Yeah, the honest answer is I don't know. I mean, I was quite quiet as a kid. Like I was quite studious. I was never like super clever or anything. Like I did well at school. But I think looking back at my childhood, I was always making stuff and trying to sell stuff. So
Mm.
maybe it was just always. It's not something that necessarily developed later on. If I look back at like me, I had two younger sisters, and I was always uh, in my room making things and then trying to sell it to them and make a bit of money. Or I was quite good at drawing, so I'd sort of draw prints and then print loads of them and sell them on eBay. So I wasn't making a lot of money.
Yeah.
Food sales I absolutely loved. Like, yeah, how can I sell off old people's stuff and make the money of it? So I think there was always that innate sense of wanting to create and make something, and there was always more that kind of commerciality in me of wanting to create something and then see it sold. So I think when I started building the business and building up a bit of a plan, it just came naturally to me.
Mm. No, I mean, it's so interesting for our listeners who are kind of on the fence of jumping in with their own idea. And I think a lot of it, as you said, what we were talking about earlier about the enormity of the first step. Sometimes it can just be easy as saying, right, I need to message 10 people on LinkedIn today who know more than me. Bosh,
Yeah,
that's your first step. And then that will compound. And then you do it the next day and the next day. Then you have a coffee and it starts to build and build and build and compound.
yeah.
It's really interesting.
I mean, one thing, I guess I'm like a fairly organized person, but anyone can do like a smaller version or a more detailed version of this. But I had as I got in, I had a project plan because there's so many facets to building a brand. There is like obviously the development of it. If you're creating a food or a drink brand, there's the development of it. Then there's the branding. Then there's the kind of the legality side of it, like actually setting up an entity. Then there's the kind of website and the launch part. So there's all these different facets, and it can be really easy to get overwhelmed. So I just wrote it all down. I think I can't remember the name of a program. It was like a project plan program where I could, as I went, tick things off. And I wrote in family. I would say to my sisters, like, I'd give them jobs to do. I'd like delegate, like just your friends and family, if they're happy to give you a hand and like get them excited about the idea, say, look, if it all works out, I'll buy you dinner, or whatever you need to do to kind of pay them back. But I did that in the beginning, and I think having a few. I didn't have a co-founder, so I think that was my way of roping in extra help and not feeling totally alone and feeling totally overwhelmed by how much there was to do. So just again breaking it down into smaller steps, and then also getting people to help with that helped me.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I've been beginning to ask this question to, well, most guests actually. It's because it kind of elicits interesting answers. And it's a hard question, so just as a word of warning, but what would you say in one sentence is a brand?
Good question. What would I say in one sentence?
If you need a bit of help, like, so I asked this to Ed and Jamie from Candy Kittens, and they said, well, they used actually Jeff Bezos as a quote, which they basically said, a brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And then Ollie from Ollie's, I always say Ollie's Olives, from Ollie's, he basically said a brand is like it's kind of like this mirror of feeling. So it's kind of what you want them. So their whole thing is feed your feel good. So it's kind of the brand is the vehicle of their why and how they express it to people. But I'd love to get what the Caleno kind of take is on that.
Yeah, for me, a brand is an entity, and I think it has a personality. It has core values. It has an outlook on life, and I think my approach to brand building is to have like a long-term brand vision of, with Caleno, it's about like, it's never changed. It's always been, I want to show people they can have fun without drinking. We've said it probably 5 or 6 different ways in the time since I started, but essentially it's always been that. And so therefore the brand is centered around that. And in terms of the personality and the way we show up and the way we activate the brand, and you talked about it with the packaging, like feeling really bright and colourful. Even the bottles, they're vibrant and they're colourful.
The feel of it is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me that is the brand. Like everything has to shine through, and so people can kind of look at any part of it, whether it's an event or the packaging, or your tone of voice, and feel that coming through. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it's kind of because what you've said, a brand is an entity. I love that. I've probably done 50 of these episodes now. I'm trying to get to what mine is, but right now mine's kind of similar to yours in that a brand is a personality and a human connection. And when you start thinking like, how does our brand act at a dinner party? How does our brand make people feel? What do people say about you when you're not in the room? All of these things kind of, and what you've said about a brand being an entity. What I want to talk about is this gorgeous box to the left of me, which is this kind of buyer's box. And in it was, you had the light and zesty, the dark and spicy, a Fever Tree ginger beer and a Fever Tree tonic, a lovely spoon, a bottle opener for opening bottles, obviously. And I just thought it was brilliant. And the way the box felt heavy, it had gravitas as you opened it. And I think it's really interesting for our listeners because we both talked about this before we hit the record button, but at those early stages, you kind of want to skip investing in that box. You kind of just want to, make it as cheap as possible, but it's kind of, you'd rather spend that money on Facebook ads or get awareness. But I actually think it's really important investing in those boxes at the beginning, because it's like you wouldn't rock up to a job interview in like Crocs and pajamas. Do you know what I mean? Unless well, you hope not, unless it's probably like DFS or something like that. But like you wouldn't. And so I think it's really interesting. So how much, you don't have to give me exact numbers, but how much are you investing in each one of those packet boxes? Because I think it's definitely the best box I've received.
Yeah. The short answer is probably a lot because they're not super high run boxes. But I think, like you say, we recognise like we're a small brand, like we're 4 years old. If we want to get noticed, then we need to be the best in our category, and we need to show up with the best look and feel, and like really deliver on the experience that we're promising everyone or that we're talking about. Like I'm a big believer, like you can't just say and tell, you have to show. And I think when someone picks up a package that feels really premium, you can tell that a lot of time and effort and care has been taken in designing it and crafting it and putting it together. Then it just shows that whoever's working for that brand, whoever's a part of that brand, really cares about the experience that you're getting. Whereas if it's just been quickly thrown together and you can tell that no one's really thought about it, cheap materials have been used, then again, it sends a signal, going back to like that question around brand. What do you want parts of your brand to say about you? And so if a box in the delivery shows up in a really shoddy way, that's going to say something about your brand. And it's always difficult because there are times where things are slightly out of our control. Like, we've had Royal Mail strikes recently. I think I put a post about that. It's always really disappointing when, things don't turn up to customers or they go missing. And it's like, you've tried your best to get every stage of that right. And then the last hurdle is disappointing for the customer. And you get it. Like, it's always disappointing if you're excited for something to arrive and it doesn't. You're like, we did everything we could. And then that last bit's out of our control. So, to some extent, but yeah, I think the time and effort you put into something really shows. And I always say that to the team. Like one of our values is above and beyond. So everything we do, we have to go above and beyond because we are small. Like we're competing with really big brands with big budgets. So in our own way, we have to show we care, whether that's through putting loads of time and effort and lots of pride into creating the best box or the best event. Like that stuff's important. It does make a difference.
One of the brands I'm now working with is a brand called Islands Chocolate. And back to this buyer's box, they're not in retail at all actually, but they're basically used by every Michelin star chef. So Heston, Gordon Ramsay, they all use this chocolate. It's fucking unreal chocolate. If there's a Gales near you, go get a hot chocolate from Gales. And we're basically putting this box together, and I was like, I want to, like, you know, when you go to a lovely restaurant and you go to the toilet and it smells amazing.
Yeah.
I almost want to spray that on the card. So when they open that box, you get that, you almost hit every sense. And I think it's really important about those things of how, as you said, we're an entity. How do we show up? And I think that's so interesting for listeners. I've also asked them to get these like weird leaves. So it may look proper naff, but we'll see what it looks like when I get to their office in a couple of days. But, no, that's really interesting. And in terms of above and beyond as a value, what are some of the other values you've got at Caleno to kind of, show up and do your thing and inspire people to have fun without drinking?
Yeah, I mean, above and beyond is one of them. Authenticity is another one, in terms of just showing up as a brand really authentically to our consumers, and trade buyers and whoever we work with. I think we're always pretty like straight to the point and honest, and we'll also bend over backwards to make things happen. And then the other ones are proactivity and positivity. So I think like proactivity is just like a given in a startup, but you know, when you're in a smaller business where you have maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 people, you have to all be inherently like kind of quite proactive about what you're doing, because if you don't do something, then the chances are it just doesn't get done, because the person next to you's got a million things that they're dealing with as well. So I think just like we're always really encourage people to show that initiative, but also do it in like a really positive way. I think the positivity part comes back to sort of that more South American culture and that outlook of, I was saying where, you know, there's a will, there's a way. And, you know, if someone tells me no, that's really a challenge. And, you know, a lot of the team have that attitude too. And when we recruit people, we want people with that attitude, because quite often as a smaller brand, you are up against it and you are sometimes facing what seems like the impossible. So if you've got that really proactive, positive approach, you've got a much better chance of facing that and climbing that mountain. So, those are just a few of them. And then the last one's personable. Like, we want to be people that other brands want to work with, and we want to be people that consumers feel like they can reach out to. So it's been great this year, like being able to get out and meet consumers again, because we hadn't been able to do that for a long, long time. It was virtual, and virtual's great, and it's opened up a lot of doors and a lot of way of doing things that, you know, perhaps were a little bit long-winded before. However, nothing beats a real life experience. And so it's given us the opportunity, like talking about the brand, like being able to kind of show up in real life with dancers. We've got a truck called Shakira. She's bright yellow and she goes around, and we can put dancers on the top. We've got music blaring. And I think that just gives off a real memorable experience that people will kind of, you know, going back to that, what are people going to say about your brand? It gives them the right thing to say about your brand.
No, absolutely. And how do you, lots of our listeners will be having to hire people, and it's the hardest thing in the world, especially hiring people. I mean, I get so many messages from people saying, I want someone who can just bash down the doors. Like, that's the message I get all the time. How do you find someone and make sure that they are proactive and they are gonna, like, how do you ascertain that in the interview process? You know what I mean? It's a very hard thing to do. Yeah,
hiring is hard, and I think often it's a process that people rush into. I certainly did in the beginning, and then I think about a year and a half in, I realised, the revelation came to me that my business is only going to get better if I hire better people. And in order for that to happen, I need to spend more time on the hiring process and making sure you get that right. Because there's two ways you can look at it. You can rush in, hire someone. If it doesn't work, you know, there's an expression like hire quickly, fire quickly. But I was like, I'd rather just get the hiring bit right, because I don't want to have to fire people, because, you know, that's sad. That's an expectation from them, and it's an expectation from you, and then they're not met and you have to part ways. So I'd always rather get the hiring bit right. So I think I did a course once, and women on the course recommended a book to me. It was called Who, the A method for hiring. And it basically sets out a process where like it's a pretty practical book. You know, you can read it, and it sets out a process for hiring those kind of like, sounds really Americanized, but like those A players, those like star individuals that you want in your business, because you are going to need people like that. And so it sets out a process which takes you from the kind of screening process, because I would say a lot of people end up spending hours interviewing people that should never have got through to that part of the process. So you can save a lot of time by actually asking the right questions at screening process to really understand that individual. I'd also say like hire via your values. So understand what's important to you as a founder or as an entrepreneur, what's important to your business, and what values do you want your business and your brand to hold. And then hire people that have those values, and find a way to, you know, ask the right questions to determine whether they have those values. By asking the right questions, you can very quickly understand if someone is proactive, if they're positive, if they're a genuine, authentic individual.
What are some of those questions? Just because that could be super actionable for our listeners who may literally have an interview tomorrow morning.
Yeah. So I think some of the questions that I ask in the beginning are things like their career aspirations, obvious one, but like, have they got ambitions? Have they got long-term goals? Asking like what they're really good at professionally, what they're not good at or interested in doing, and also asking them how their last 3 managers would rate their performance. And then I'd also say, like, don't skip this part, but later down the line it will talk about doing reference checks. A lot of people skip reference checks, but informal reference checks can go a long, long way in terms of understanding that individual and if what they've told you tallies up. So yeah, it's called the the A method for hiring. So that was a book recommended to me. So it helped me a lot in finding the right people, and just also sticking to, it's easy to just kind of go off on a whim and ask kind of slightly random questions. And I know, you know, some brands ask like really weird and wonderful questions, and you can add those in. But I've found just having like a set structure that I follow each time just means I can kind of, you know, compare individuals more easily. And yeah, I think if you get that screening bit, you can know in like 15, 20 minutes if that person is right for your brand or not.
I think it's good just to have, and we'll come on to this in a bit, that it's almost like having those hardware, you know, principles, which is like, these are the questions you've got to ask. And then you can almost add your brandy software on top of that, which could be, you know, it's almost like your je ne sais quoi, like, which you add on top, which I think is really important. Will, you know, kind of make sure you're getting people who are on brand as well, as everyone likes to say. When I was doing research for this conversation, Ellie, is there was one part that kind of, there are almost parallels between the names of your SKUs and the entrepreneurial journey, right? So like dark and spicy, there are dark days, and then light and zesty, and there's always going to be light at the end of the tunnel. And I think everyone listening to this is going through this kind of, the pendulum will swing between kind of feelings of gut-wrenching despair to kind of, you know, jubilant days of just like, oh my God, I'm on top of the world. I'd love to know kind of what's been I suppose the hardest day on this journey for you, and how did you overcome that?
God, hardest day. so many different reasons. I think some of the hardest days were actually in the beginning. You do get tough days later on in the business, of course, but I've found personally they're easier because I've got a team around me and people to share those days with. Whereas in the beginning, it you know, as a solo founder, it was fairly lonely, and you needed a lot of self motivation to kind of keep going, and you're kind of up against this big wall. So there were a few times, and when I talk sometimes about the very first thing that went wrong in my business, it was before I'd even launched. I'd basically convinced a bottler to run my first 1,000 bottles, and been kind of constantly on the phone trying to get hold of them, And bearing in mind, this is sort of, we're in like late December now, and I'm supposed to be launching in January, which is quite a key month for the non-alcoholic category, funnily enough. And just not getting back to me. Finally, they're like, "Don't worry, we've done the bottles, it's fine." Got them into the warehouse. I was like, "Thank God," because it was, meaning the difference between whether I could launch or not. And then I get a call from my warehouse, basically saying, "Ellie, we've checked the boxes. We thought we should like let you know that there's something wrong with the labels." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And essentially, I think where they'd, and then, things that go wrong always go wrong in the beginning, because it's the first time you've done it. Like, you don't have any kind of context at this point. They'd labelled them in December where it's really cold, and so where condensation had formed under the label, the labels had started kind of peeling off and bubbling, and it just looked awful. I was like, going back to that experience, someone opening their package, this new brand that they've potentially ordered online, and they open it up and it looks horrendous.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I was like, I can't send bottles out like that. Not my very first batch. Well, not any really. There was no way I would have been happy with that quality. So sort of went into solution mode and rang the warehouse after like crying for an hour. Rang the warehouse back and said, "Okay, I'm going to be at my parents' for Christmas in Kent. Can you deliver the two pallets of stock that I had? And I will find a way to get them relabeled and back in stock." So I then got quickly on the phone to the guys that printed my labels and explained to them what had happened. And normally they work to like 4-week lead times, and managed them to convince them to do a short run for me, redo the label so I could basically relabel them. A friend built like a little device which helped me relabel them quickly, but basically it just meant that I spent most of my Christmas with my sisters taking off these labels and putting new ones back on. So like doing the job properly, basically. And so that, like, those times were pretty dark in the beginning, and it just felt like everything had ended. I think because I'd been working 2-3 months up until that point, and then something like that just knocks you for six and you're not expecting it. But there's been tough times. I'm sure a lot of people talk about COVID and when that hit, and it was like nothing anyone had ever seen before. And being a business owner, like, you suddenly become a leader. Like, I never felt like a leader until that point, where I was staring at my employees and reassuring them everything would be okay when I didn't know if things would be okay. But I did have a strong sense of it, like, I will make sure we're fine. Like, I had this overriding sense of there's no way I'm going to let my business fail. Like, there's no way I'm going to let this whole situation take me and the business down. So I kind of never felt too down or depressed, but there were some really difficult days where every which way you turned, it just felt like everything was against you. But you do find a way to kind of pick yourself up and dust yourself off and
yeah. No, it's so interesting, because I think every listener will be going through that. And now I've left Manulife, I'm on my own. Sometimes I feel like this bloody red room or maroon room is just like closing in on me. I'm like, fuck this. Like, yeah. But what do you say to yourself to keep on keeping on, if that makes sense? Are there any like mottos, or is it all like, how do you manage those voices in your head to make sure you are keeping on?
Yeah, I don't know. I think this has helped me actually, but when I'm having a particularly tough day, or I'm struggling with something, I write it down. Like, I've got a diary that I've kept. Like, I don't write in it every day. Like, basically when something really good happens or something really bad happens, I tend to write in it. If it's like an average day, then it doesn't get written in. But I started, I don't know, from the very beginning, just writing down my feelings and my emotions, almost like a kind of Dear Diary journal type exercise. And then I'd save it and then like go away and do something else. And then, maybe a couple of months later, I'd come back and sometimes I just go back through it. And I'm like, oh my God, like, look how far you've come. And I'd see myself in the beginning being like, I can't even imagine hiring my first employee. Like, I don't know what to do. How do I pay them? Like, just trying to figure all this stuff out. And then actually a year later, I've got 5 or 6 employees, and you think, okay, well, I've managed to figure it all out and I'm here now. So I think it gives you that for me personally, gave me a sense of comfort, I guess, in knowing that I was scared and I was worried about things then, but actually I've come through the other side and I'm now better for it. So sometimes I think just writing stuff down can help.
You know, I mean, that's super actionable. And I think it goes back to this thing you were saying about taking one small step at a time will kind of squelch the enormity of the idea, but also the kind of the sting of the first setback. The more of these little, you kind of, okay, I got through that one, I got through that one, I got through that one. It kind of builds this kind of resilience armor. Now, in terms of on trade, well, basically turning on trade, I suppose, because you worked. Is it Matthew Clark's, this big booze? Yeah. So I've never, obviously being in peanut butter, never sold into on trade. I always used to get confused actually between the two. I remember someone came up to me and I just started my career. I was like, "Yeah, mate, like what are you doing off trade? Or we're doing really well in the on trade." I was like, "What the fuck are you on about? Surely it's all just on trade. Like there's no off trade on trade." But so you've were at Matthew Clark for, I think, was it 4 or 5 years, and then you've now obviously working in, well, both your kind of grocery and on trade with Caleno. Lots of our listeners will be, you know, trying to start a brand, specifically, you know, trying to get into the on trade. Like, how is it different from grocery? First question, and secondly, like, what are the absolute kind of must-dos to ensure it's a rip-roaring success?
Yeah, how's it different? I'll probably start there. I mean, they are two very different channels. I mean, one, you're aimed at people who want to consume at home, and the other you're aimed at people that want to go out and consume in a bar, pub or restaurant. So one, you know, on trade is able, you know, that you're really relying on them to deliver that experience on your behalf. If you're a brand selling into the on trade, then there's a few connecting points before you reach the end consumer. So, you know, very often there's a wholesaler who will have salespeople selling your product. Then there'll be the actual bar, restaurant themselves, who then have bartenders or waitresses that again will recommend or upsell your product or not, as the case may be, depending on whether you do training with them. There's element of visibility, like, are you on menu? So there's quite a few points that you need to get right in order to make sure in an on-trade setting that your product is being seen, your product is being recommended, and that your brand is getting consumed in the right way, you know, in the right cocktail, the right serve. Because we've all been there where maybe you order a gin and tonic and it turns up with like a little bit of lime and 1 ice cube, and you're like, oh, it's not great.
Yeah, sure.
So they can be very different experiences. But in terms of on trade, like it's really a place where people go to socialize and connect as human beings, and it's a real, you know, I was so devastated when I couldn't go to the pub over COVID or, you know, go out, because they're really where we make social connections with other people, and they're so important to our society. So I find them really important for our brand in terms of bringing that brand experience to life. So we're sort of handing over the mantle to them. We're not there serving the customer. We've just sold them a bottle of Caleno, so it's up to us to make sure they've got all the tools they need to sell it incorrectly, and give the customer the very best experience. Whereas off trade, different kettle of fish. You know, you're much closer to the consumer in terms of, you know, you might go through a wholesaler, you might sell direct to a retailer, and then you're on shelf, and a consumer's basically picking up your bottle. So everything that consumer knows about you is basically what they're looking at: price point, what the brand looks like, what the packaging says. Like, that's how a consumer is determining what to think about your brand. And there might be other things that you've done around, you know, the marketing. Slightly different in that you've got, you know, very often one point of contact, a buyer. You're agreeing trade plans 6 to 12 months in advance, promotional plans in advance. So I think coming from the on trade and then learning off trade, I found it much simpler in terms of, I've got one buyer, we agree this plan, and then when we stick to the plan, and, you know, we make sure that rate of sale is good. We make sure we're doing marketing. We make sure we're promoting the product. So it is simpler. But I would say on trade, although more complex, you do have the ability to really create that social connection and that brand experience with your product. It's not to say you can't do that in off trade, but it's a slight different. That person is then taking the bottle home and using it at home. So it's more making sure that all your kind of website, your recipes, your social media, providing like all the inspiration they need to get the best out of that product. But I really enjoyed understanding like the world of off trade as well, because obviously until then I'd only known on trade. So I really enjoyed kind of uncovering its secrets.
It's so interesting because I do think there's also lessons you could take from. My dyslexia kicks in now. It's like the off trade, on trade, from off trade into on trade. On trade into off trade. In that the whole brand exposure and getting people about that social connection, you can still do that with retailers. And I think building that human contact, so meeting the store managers, doing the sampling sessions where you can. Obviously, you can't do it in all retailers because it's expensive, but even in your indies, like building that connection with someone where it doesn't have to be kind of. It can be at that store is a real unfair advantage. And what are some of the kind of, I suppose, what are some of the watch outs with on trade in terms of like getting it right? Because sure, there'll be loads of brands who may list with a pub group, and then, because I think if I'm a bar, serving cocktails at a bar, there's so many other brands. Like, what makes them pick up Caleno and say, right, you need this as a drink? Do you see what I'm coming from?
Yeah, I think the watch outs with the on trade, I think exactly that, understanding your own value and your proposition and why, like, it's easy to go in and kind of think me, this is why you should have me, but you've really got to think about the end value for them in terms of like just down to like what margin are they going to make. Is it an upsell? Are they going to be, for us as a non-alcoholic product, one of the advantages that operators have when they put us on menu is that we're quite an incremental purchase. So, for example, if someone was coming in at lunchtime and they're going to order water, like you gave the example about the Ulthrop, like upselling you to a cocktail, like, water doesn't cost anything, but I'm not saying don't drink water, but you can drink water at home. Like, you go to the on-trade for an experience, right? So of course you want to drink a cocktail, a non-alcoholic cocktail at lunchtime. So I think it's really understanding and conveying the benefits to on-trade operators and helping them understand, look, this can get you better footfall. This can get you better footfall at traditionally lower trading periods, like lunchtime or early evening. You can upsell people from water to this product. We're gonna activate with you, so we're not just going to put the bottle on shelf, but we're actually going to invest a little bit in marketing. I would say the watch out there is understanding realistically what budgets you can use for that. And the people and the resource you're gonna need. The on-trade channel, my experience, is fairly resource heavy because you're going out, you're meeting people, you're getting around to different bars and restaurants and doing training. So I think no one wants to ever let anything down. So I'm sure there's a tendency for smaller brands to overpromise and then potentially underdeliver. So always be realistic about how much you can do with the people you've got and how much you can spend with the money you've got. And just prioritizing, like, we'll spend more with places we know we can activate with. And again, going back to that brand piece, like, feel really aligned with our brand and can give people the best experience, and we'll tell the brand story in the best way possible.
Yeah. And say like a Fuller's pub group, again, I'm literally so naive to this, so apologies, but or ignorant, but do they have like a marketing plan, like with like a Waitrose or a Sainsbury's, or are you literally having to spend that yourself, or do they have like set things?
I'm not sure about Fuller's, but there will definitely be Some brands. So, like to give an example, Incipio, who do the Pergola on the Roof, Lost in Brixton, they've just opened a new venue called Palm House, which is amazing, incredible, definitely visit. So we will agree a marketing plan with them. So we'll talk about, so we'll agree like different cocktails that are going on onto the menu. I mean, ultimately it's up to them, but we can recommend cocktails that are really great that go well with the different Caleno bottles, and we'll then agree kind of a bit of spend for certain times of the year and certain marketing activities we want to put on in their venue to really promote the brand, and show them that we want to work together. So yeah, you can definitely put together a plan in a similar way. I guess less so, I guess in off trade you'd agree a promotional plan and it's more point of sale, but you can do that in on trade. You know, you can get away bar displays, something around your bottle. You can agree menu positioning, making sure that your brand is really prominent on the menu. You can make sure that bar staff are upselling your product. You can go in and do training. So it's definitely works in a similar sort of way. Just slightly different occasion.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's so the next question, and I've literally badgered on about this like kind of ad nauseum, and but I do think it is the hardest thing for any brand that gets into a retailer is getting the product off the shelf and getting the consumers back. I think if you've done 50 iterations on a product, they'll come back because it tastes lovely, but getting it off the shelf. And one of the brands I may be working with is a brand called White Mousu, which is like a kind of a chili oil brand. And one of the questions they asked me, and I thought, oh my God, that's unreal, is you've got to drive the rate of sale, and you've got 10 days to drive the rate of sale from now till December, is what they've said. And they're an Irish brand, they've got a bit of distribution over here. And I was like, oh my God, 10 days, that suddenly gives you this focus where you have to just, you can't focus on, you've got to focus on what really moves the needle. And I think lots of our listeners, and I'm so scatty, is I'll just try and throw a load of shit at the wall and just sort of kind of see what sticks. So that's my natural inclination. Say you had like literally 10 days to really drive the rate of sale with Caleno at, I don't know, let's just say Sainsbury's, for example. Like, how would you spend that time, and what would you be doing to make sure you're really driving that rate of sale?
Yeah, it's a good question. What can you do? I think talking about, depending on the size of your team, like we've got a sizable team now. If every single member of our team actually got out into store, like went to 2 or 3 stores, went and found the BWS manager, talked to them about the product. You know, quite often, I know Waitrose and M&S have them, but they'll have BWS specialists, so people that can help people in aisle, can recommend things. Even if you could
BW, is that beer? That's beer, wines. Yeah,
spirits.
sorry. Yeah, okay, yeah, sorry. Yeah,
acronym, beers, wines, and spirits.
There's so many acronyms in our industry, isn't there?
Yeah, there are.
Get them tattooed on my arm for this bloody podcast.
So even if you can, you know, get hold of them and influence them and get them behind the brand, get them understanding the story and how they're mixed, like that can go a really, really long way, like just getting the basics right. And I also think, like, we've seen examples of how social media can drive people to store. I mean, I've not quite unlocked it yet. I'd love to say that Caleno is like a social media viral sensation, like the likes of Little Moon, but we haven't quite cracked it yet. But I mean, if you can get that right, or get some sort of virality around your brand, then Jesus, that can help. But again, it's easier said than done. So it's always like looking at the basics, and then can you do anything interesting that is PRable, is going to get picked up, where it's obviously got a bigger amplification than you could offer.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in it for listeners. I think so many brands go into a retailer, then it's like a revolving door sometimes. So I think getting how you can really dive into getting the product off the shelf, there's just so many kind of delicious insights in that. Where I want to go now, look, we talked about the dark days, but, you know, there are definitely light and happy and jubilant and zesty days as well. I'd love to know kind of and this is about kind of open the door into the next part, which is all about this kind of Summer of Fiesta, which is your new campaign, and the Say Yes, the sort of Summer of No Regrets, which is your last campaign. Like, what's been the best day? Like, what's been the most happy day? Because I think I'd love to kind of know, what that was.
I think some of my best days have actually been this year, and actually seeing the brand come to life in real life. So there was a moment in January. So we basically drove a giant yellow bus around London that basically said, say no to another soft drink, and there were like various different slogans, and it was like, why waste your taste on water? It was basically just saying to people, if you're going to take part in Dry January, if you're going to take some time off alcohol this month, then like excite your taste buds. Don't just go for the usual boring option. Like there are great options out there now, and Caleno is one of them. And so that was quite fun, just going around, hopping off, dropping bottles on people's doors. We filmed it, we videoed it, and we went to like all the major landmarks. So I think just getting out and being able to do something was quite exciting. And then also this year we bought a new truck that we branded up called a Shakira, and we've been driving again around the country with her and activating different places. And I've been to quite a few of the events we've done with her. And I think just being there and in real life and seeing people's reaction when they've not heard of Caleno, or they've maybe not tried any of the category before, and just seeing like their reactions and how much they like the product. Or quite often they'll say, oh, like I really struggled, I took a month off, and like my friends made fun of me, and I didn't feel like I could go out, and then they feel like they've got a real solution. So I think for me, those moments are really, really powerful, because they remind me actually why I started this. Like we lived in a situation where, and we still do to some extent, where you go out and you don't drink alcohol, you're ridiculed. You're ridiculed, like you say, for wanting to take time off a drug, and actually maybe make a positive lifestyle change, or even just drink less, which is a really, really positive thing, especially in an age where a lot of people do suffer with their mental health. A lot of people are trying to live healthier lives, work out more, go for that run, join that gym. And so I have to remember that, every new person we introduce the brand to, like that's potentially a positive step they could take in their life, in kind of drinking a little bit better, and not always feeling like they need to turn to alcohol. So yeah, I think anytime we get out as a brand in real life and introduce Caleno to someone new is like a really exciting time for me. And we've definitely been able to do that this year. I mean, the summer campaign, Say Yes to a Summer of No Regrets, is basically like just saying to people, go out there, live your life, do everything you couldn't do last summer and the summer before that, but also, moderate, have some alcohol-free drinks, and like wake up the next day feeling great about it. Kind of like your experience, I think. Just realizing that there is another way to enjoy yourself socially when it comes to drinking.
I mean, like in our culture, we do kind of get indoctrinated into booze. I remember I went to America, it's like 2018, to New York, and they just don't drink as much as us. Like we binge drink, and it's especially in sports, like, who's the biggest boozer, mate? Like, do you know what I mean? There's this booze culture. Everyone kind of goes to Ayia Napa or Malia, and it's like, that's a massive piss up. They even had that TV program. What was it? Sun, Sex, Suspicious Parents, something like that. It's like, again, it's like evangelizing, like, when you're 18, you go and get absolutely bollocked. Yeah. And I think there's real value in actually, taking a little bit of time off, and just experiencing that kind of, lucid clarity. What is your relationship? Do you drink at all, or because I think that's the other thing is, like, people think, alcohol free, low to no brands, Oh, they're like, they've come out straight out of a monastery. I've got loads of mates who work at Lucky Saint, like, and I was at Tame Impala with them the other week, and I was like, well, they're definitely boozing. So what's your kind of relationship with the Caleno team as well?
Yeah, so I still drink. I'm doing sober October at the moment, so I'm taking some time off. But I would call myself like a balanced drinker. I've always been interested in the drinks industry as a whole, so I always like experimenting. I like trying new things. But this brand started because I didn't want to have to drink alcohol all the time, and I still wanted to have great drinks, but not always be drinking alcohol. And I think a lot of people are like me. And actually, if you look at our consumers and who's actually drinking Caleno and probably Lucky Saint and some other brands, they're not completely sober. They are a lot of the time moderating, so they might just be not drinking during the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They're going to the gym. People have our customers, like, they've got busy lives. They're going for an F45 workout. They're then going to meet with their friends, and they still want to socialize, but not always with the alcohol. And I think that's where brands like Caleno slot in really nicely, because you're still getting the sense of being part of that drinking occasion with your friends, but not feeling like you're the one stuck with a glass of water or a Diet Coke. So yeah, and a lot of team, we've got some in the team that don't drink, and then we've got a lot in the team like me that everyone that's kind of joined our company though is on that sort of more of a balanced journey. Like, we're all quite active. We enjoy health and fitness. We also like having a laugh. We like socializing together. So I think it's just making the most out of life, but then not necessarily, I think we're all in that situation where we don't want to lean on alcohol too heavily, Yeah, that's kind of my take on it.
No, it's just interesting, because I think it's, as I said, I don't want to kind of weaponize booze, because, I love a drink as well, and I do like getting very silly at times, but it's just like not having to do that every week, and it's really interesting. And what does Caleno actually mean? Like, is there a meaning behind that, or is there?
Yeah, good question. So when I was talking about Cali earlier, so my family are from a city called Cali in Colombia, and it's basically known as the unofficial capital of salsa, because everyone goes there to dance or to learn how to dance. They've got some amazing clubs. So, I mean, they often say like people are born knowing how to dance. They're not, but they definitely have rhythm. So when I was coming up with a name for Caleno, I originally called it Feliz. That was like my working title.
Feliz meaning
happy, means
right.
Happy. But I think McDonald's already trademarked Caja Feliz, which is Happy Meal in Spanish. So I was like, I don't want to say that.
Yeah, don't go down that route.
That was the working title, and then actually calling it Caleno seemed really fitting, because like essentially that trip to Colombia was where it all started, and where I felt like spiritually the brand was born. And I've taken so much inspiration from that culture and everything kind of about the South American way of life. So that's why it's called Caleno.
And the Eno bit, sorry, that is, what does that mean? Because obviously Calais is the city, like the place, and then
no, I haven't explained it right. So if you're from Cali, you're called a Caleno, as if
right.
Like, just as if you're from London, you're a Londoner. If you're from Bristol, you're a Bristolian.
Right. Bosh, with you. Okay, makes sense. No, I love it. I absolutely love it. And where I want to go now is we've kind of talked a lot about some almost kind of this hardware versus software. So hardware is stuff that you'd learn, whether it's through a book or through going on a course at, say, with Matthew Clark, or going to uni. And I think we all need this element of hardware in what we're doing. So I don't know, like for sales, it could be seeing things as a partnership would be kind of the hardware kind of principle. And then a software principle is something you kind of learn from on the job, but it's something you can't get taught in a business school. You can only learn by doing.
Yeah.
And I want to kind of use the kind of hardware, software kind of scope to explore leadership? Because what you said just pre-COVID, you said, I never thought I'd be, not that I never thought I'd be a leader, but you never thought you were a leader. And then suddenly COVID came in and like, I have to be a leader. I have to say, we're going to get through this. I'd love to know what are some of the kind of the hardware principles, that you've kind of learned through, going on courses or uni or whatever, that you implement in Caleno first.
Yeah.
And then to follow that, what the stuff that you've learned, like the nuanced bits that you've learned. It's almost like following a recipe. Like you could get someone to teach you how to make, I don't know, a spag bowl, right? But you'll know just the amount of parmesan, just how you want the pasta al dente, like those little bits.
Yeah. And I'm probably more of a software person. Like when I'm cooking, I'm just like, I'm a bit like Jamie.
Same here. Yeah. Yeah.
Like it would turn like, don't let me near. I don't bake because it's so exact. I don't work well within those constraints. So yeah, you won't normally find me baking. But yeah, I think when it comes to hardware, like it's definitely important. And I've done, I think I did a Young Foodies leadership course a year or two ago, which I found the structure of that really helpful. And it's something I can always go back to, just pulling out some of the principles. So one idea which was new to me was kind of this idea that, people that you're managing are like, they might be doing a job, but there's different spectrums of where they might be within that job in terms of how junior they are and how advanced they are in that role. And therefore then how much support they may then need from you. So it's an element, it's kind of going to that kind of telling versus more coaching aspect. So, if they are very new in the beginning, so I'll give you an example, like my sister, she was actually the second person to join Caleno, and she came in, she used to work for Muller, and she came in an operations role. So she'd previously done brand and marketing. And then she came in to do an operations role. So she was essentially learning that from scratch. So then it was about me imparting all of the knowledge. So really telling her what to do rather than just kind of throwing in the deep end, expecting her to kind of know what to do instinctively. And whereas, to now, she's kind of learnt that, she understands it and, very hands off, and she kind of gets on with it. So I think it's just understanding when different people come into your brand or your organization, they're not necessarily going to be the finished product. Like you do have to put in a lot of work to help them get there. And there are different structures to do that. So I'd say that's one example. And then I think on the softer side, it's of leadership, it's there's no one right answer to leadership, and everyone has a different leadership style. And I think it's understanding yours, and making sure people understand that too. So I would say I'm like fairly laid back in terms of my leadership. Like I'm not kind of on top of people or checking like that they're doing it my way. Like I'd rather people do it their own way, but as long as they get to the end result and they've done it in a way that they're happy with, then that's fine with me. And I think you actually get more out of people if they feel like they've got more autonomy. But I think just you can get a lot from leadership just about being honest and open about where there are difficulties in the business, and inviting people to kind of help support that, and not necessarily shielding too much from people, but actually I've had feedback where the communication is really open and honest, and they feel like they can contribute. People actually feel like they can be a part of what's going on. So I think that's the softer skills. It's like actually treating people like human beings, and knowing it's, they've got other things going on in their lives. It's not just about work. They might have kids, particularly during COVID, like people were struggling with homeschooling. There were stresses, there were like loads of different pressures on people, just even being stuck at home. Like different people dealt with that very differently. So I think also it's just talking to people on a human level. And those are the softer skills you can't teach. Like they just have to be there, and you have to make sure you're checking yourself and just making sure, have I checked in that person? Like they've been quite quiet this week. Are they okay? And those are really important, kind of getting the most out of people as a leader.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I definitely think in challenger brands, and that's kind of one of the reasons I'm so kind of drawn to it, is I think it's much easier to be open with your founder or boss versus, you know, a big corporate where people are trying to, like, you know, collude their way up the ladder, I suppose. But
Yeah.
how practically do you actually get people to feel that when they sit with Ellie that they can be open? Because again, it's something that's probably easy to do on paper, but in practice is not so, like, it's not black and white. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. So I mean, as a brand, we try and get like a lot of face time. So we are slightly hybrid in that, you know, we've got 2 office outposts, London and Bristol, but we try and get time together and like keep that line of communication open. One thing we started doing, I think it was December last year, was these kind of like quarterly residentials where we all get together as an entire team every quarter. We rent a massive Airbnb and we have like a whole day where we'll look back at the quarter and what we've achieved, and then we'll also look forward to where we're going and kind of get the team really excited about plans. And we also just have a lot of fun. Like, we do fun stuff. Like the last one, we set everyone the challenge of throwing the best fiesta, and we gave everyone a different cocktail. They had to go away and make it, and then like 50 quid to buy a load of props, and then just basically throw the best 5-minute party ever.
Who won that, out of interest?
Not my team. I mean, unfortunately, rigged. It was Team Mojito, so they won, but they threw an awesome fiesta. But it's amazing, just with drinks and like a few little props, and a bit of an imagination, what you can do. But I think having that in real life time where people can sit down and chat to me and have like open, honest conversation, I think they see you as a real person versus just someone who's behind a screen. And I think that can go a long way, and just fostering that culture as an organisation and making sure everyone knows that it's okay to have days where you're not okay, and just be open about that and talk to the team. I think just making sure you are letting that be known as clearly as possible is important, but also just having fun along the way. Like, we all work really hard, like there's no getting away from it, and you're in a startup. It is hard work, like it's fast graph, there's a lot of hustling. We're growing 100% plus year on year. Like, those targets don't hit themselves. So we've got to have fun along the way, and we've got to enjoy it as well.
It's almost like thinking out loud that the fun was almost kind of builds the trust, and the trust when you get back to the office is there, and that allows people to be open with you, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm conscious of your time, Ellie. So where I want to wrap up is actually with your podcast, the Joyful Drinker podcast. And I listened to the episode with, I think it's Laura from Club Soda.
Yes.
I thought it was a really interesting episode about how, you know, she was, I think it was 2015 that she'd started this movement, which seems long before, because, you know, now it's got wind in its sails. And quite a few things I want to explore here. So his first question is, what are the 1 to 2 significant events you believe, obviously, other than COVID, that have really kind of made this low to no movement really begin to just snowball?
1 to 2 events. I think the major factor has been when retailers started to get behind it. So that happened in late 2018, early 2019, which is when Caleno went into Sainsbury's. Got a national listing in Sainsbury's sort of 3 months into me running the brand, which was huge for like an unknown brand. But it really, I think until then, it was maybe just Tesco who was stocking Sealip at the time, who were the only other brand in the category. But Sainsbury's saw the opportunity, and then other retailers started to follow. And it's now a substantial part of their drinks offerings. I talk about the beers, wines and spirits category, but it's incremental, because you've got people going in who aren't going to buy from the alcohol aisle who are then coming in to buy non-alcoholic drinks. So I think that really marked a change in the category. And once grocers get behind something, that's a change in millions. So that was significant. I think I'm also not sure when it started to happen. It was a gradual change, but the conversations went from and this kind of attitude towards kind of non-alcoholic drinks and this real kind of looking down the nose. I'd get it sometimes from the trade and buyers and people I spoke to. It then switched to actually, this is the category on the move, and this is a category that's going places and is growing. I think in the beginning there was a sentiment that this might be a fad, particularly in drinks. Like there's so many things that happen in drinks. There's lots of innovation. I mean, orange wine, that was a thing. I don't think it ever got
Orange wine? Really?
Yeah.
I didn't even know it was a thing, yeah.
I mean, that's just an example, but I remember when I was in the industry and someone saying orange wine, it's going to be the next big thing. And I think there was a suspicion that the same would be of the no to low category, and it would just go away. But as it started to really build momentum, it didn't go anywhere. In fact, it just kept growing and snowballing, and it got so much press coverage that really a big shift in the conversation for me started to change. And it was where buyers were just shutting down walls, where actually they'd be really open to talking to you about stocking a range of non-alcoholic products. So that was the big flip for me in terms of people's attitudes around non-alcoholic drinks, where previously it just been, this is ridiculous, like this is not here to stay, to actually, this is a bigger movement. A little bit like, I guess, the vegan, movement, and you'd be hard pressed to go into a restaurant now and not find vegan or vegetarian options on the menu. Whereas, there was a time where that didn't exist. So we are getting there, and like availability could be better, but we are where we are on the journey. So it's growing.
I was just like, it's almost what is the I don't know the answer to this, right? But what's the difference between a fad and a trend, and why do some, I'm not saying they're fads, but why do some things become and we ain't going anywhere trend versus like a fad? And I don't know, I've got a few friends who had a hard seltzer brand, and obviously that was doing so well in the States and it was kicking off. I think it still does extremely well over there, but in the UK, it's like everyone came piling in, and it's like, is this going to be a fad, or are there going to be a few brands that win, and is it a trend? I don't know what the answer is to that, but it is quite an interesting thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you get similar. Could be said of things like kombucha. Kombuchas are, whilst they're popular, they've never quite reached the mainstream audience. And look, I think the answer is if we knew that, if we had a crystal ball, then we'd all be very, very rich.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not a fad, that's going to be a trend. I think ultimately, if I think about the non-alcoholic category, I think because it's so firmly and deeply rooted in this overarching growth of like the health and wellness trend, basically, essentially, that's been gaining steady momentum. If you think about brands like Gymshark or any kind of gym fitness brands, Peloton, F45, like those have all suddenly been gaining momentum. And if you think about the non-alcoholic drinks category and why people choose to cut down alcohol, it's predominantly for health reasons, either their mental health or their physical health. And so that's really tied into a super core trend that's not going anywhere. So I think if it's embedded in something like that, then it makes it more than a fad. It makes it part of a movement, really.
Yeah, you're so right. It's something I never thought about before, but it's so like interesting how that happens. Especially in a world when predominantly the Brits love a drink. I remember I was in Lisbon a couple of weeks ago, and there was a guy next to me who was like, yeah, I saw alcohol-free gin in the supermarket. It's like, what's the fucking point in that? Like, there's still a way to go in terms of, you know, people's perceptions. Couple more questions. So, doing this podcast is one of the greatest things I've kind of ever done. It's one of the best decisions I've ever made. I'd love to know, what's the best lesson you've learned from a guest on the Joyful Drinker that you kind of implement in your life, either weekly or daily?
Oh, the best advice
or story.
Do you know what? I think one thing that I'm trying to put into practice more recently, it was an episode with Flora Beverly, who's an ultra marathon runner, and she talked about her method for building up to a marathon. There's a lots of synergies for kind of building up to a business, like doing small bits at a time and kind of building up to that. And very often you're not going to feel motivated to do it, but you've got to go out and do it. But she also kind of talked about how you'll have, like, you still want to have the enjoyment in it. So if there are days where you're just like, I really, really am not feeling it, and if I go out and do this, it's going to make me feel worse, then just don't do it. And so I kind of take that into my business where, if there's something that's really, really not giving me energy, and I don't have the motivation and the energy for it right now, I'll be like, I'll do it on a different day. Like, I don't want to be in a situation where I'm not enjoying this task or this piece of work, but I'm just not in the right mind frame for it right now. And I think that's something that I've tried to take. She used it for exercise, and you can definitely use it for exercise, but you can also flip it and use it for day-to-day life or your work life.
Because I've kind of got that thing is that I've now I've gone freelance and don't work in a business, as I've now just realised to just do it when almost know the ebbs and the flows of the day and the week when I want to be able to do things. And I know I'm not going to be able to. I basically take a long lunch break. So my brain's is basically vacant from one till like kind of 3. It's just not really there, and it's kind of knowing that. And I think it's a nice bit of nuance to this whole like discipline, like keep grafting. It's like, well, yes, but if you're not feeling it, like take a step back.
And I guess, like, to give a bit of context, for the first 2-3 years of my business, I didn't do that. Like, I was like full on 8 till 9 p.m. every day. Like, I don't advocate for this, but there were days where I would just want my day to be as productive as possible. And there was loads to do. So I kind of got on, and I was probably so busy I didn't ever stop and think. But now I've got a bigger team. There are days where I'm like, I don't want to do myself more damage by doing this and not enjoying it, and just like, I'm not going to get the best out of myself and this piece of work if I do it right now. And like, just understanding, your energy levels and when's the right time to be doing things. So I think that was definitely a nice takeout for me.
Definitely. Final 2 questions, and one that kind of just sprouted up. I didn't realise that you got a Say No's listing within 3 months. That's mental. How did you, like, what did you say to the buyer in that meeting? Because that, I mean, loads of brands would be like, oh my days, how do I do that?
So the opportunity actually came about because I was doing some sampling at, talk about Laura, who runs Club Soda. They started something called the Mindful Drinking Festivals, and I'd gone along to one in Spitalfields in the summer in 2018, and someone had come up to me from the Future Brands team, and he basically tried the product, said he liked it, and would be in touch on Monday. And I thought, what? Like, that doesn't happen. Someone from Sainsbury is just walking up to you. But he was true to his word. He got in contact with me on the Monday, and we stayed in contact. And it was basically through that he put me in touch with the buyer and gave me the heads up that they were looking at a range. So it was sort of serendipity, because I wasn't selling at that time. I was just there to get feedback from people about the product, and then happened to be in the right place, the right time, and then understand like when the opportunity was there. And I think also being one of the first brands to market, having a good product, having a good brand, all the things were there. So that particular example, I think it was a case of right place, right time, right brand, and then jumping on opportunity. I mean, I could easily have turned around and said, look, we're not ready for this yet, because I wasn't. Like, when I agreed to it, I hadn't even produced my first 1,000 bottles, and suddenly I was looking down the barrel of like ordering 6,000. So I had some pretty steep production and logistical challenges. So I, like, a sensible person would have said no and being like, we're not quite ready, like we've not got the brand in the market yet. But then the entrepreneur in me was like, there's no way I can say no to Sainsbury's. This opportunity may not come around again. So I said yes, and I made it happen.
Said yes and made it happen. I love that. And yeah, final questions, kind of with, I suppose, utopian rose-tinted goggles on, I suppose, is what do you think? It's been so rapid, this movement in the last 2 to 3 years. Like, what do you think it would look like in 4 years' time? The category, I suppose.
Well, I still remember what it looked like 6 years ago. That was that night out in Bristol, pretty poor options. In 3 to 4 years' time, I would love to be able to walk into any bar or restaurant and know that there's a great non-alcoholic range on offer. I'd love to be able to walk into any supermarket and know that there are some amazing brands on shelf. So I think for me, it's about availability, first and foremost. I think the on-trade has got more of a way to go. You know, retailers now, grocers are well stocked on that front, albeit convenience. There's still huge amounts of opportunity for the no and low sector in convenience, particularly on the spirit side. So yeah, I think for me, it's about availability. Like once the demand is there from consumers, so once these products become more and more available, you'll just start to see it grow and become more normalized. Like just being able to kind of rock up to your friend's house party with a bottle of Caleno and go, yeah, like not the question doesn't even get asked. It doesn't matter what you're drinking, as long as you're there, as long as you're having a good time. Like there's no stigma, there's no peer pressure. That's the problem at the moment. There is still this stigma, and there's still this fear of peer pressure. You know, we talk to a lot of our customers, and they don't want people to know they're not drinking because they just don't want to have to explain themselves. Hope that will change.
I think literally, I think this back to what we said right at the beginning is, you know, booze is the only drug that if you stop taking, people think you've got a problem. I think the Caleno mission and what you're kind of, you know, the real driving force behind is this whole fiesta, this whole, you know, say yes for someone, no regrets, a delicious product that looks and feels like a kind of carnival. I think you guys are going to be taking, you know, like the right kind of salient steps to make that happen. Ellie, I've loved this conversation. I think there's so much in it for listeners. And yeah, if anyone is listening, go and grab yourself some Caleno because it is so delicious.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's been great to chat to you and tell you a bit more about Caleno and take a bit of a trip down memory lane.
Cool. So I'm gonna hit